Good morning, and can I welcome everyone to this, the 17th meeting of the Standards, Procedures and Public Appointments Committee in 2025. I've received apologies this morning from Annie Wells, so we are joined by Edward Mountain, MSP, as substitute. Good morning, Edward. Our first agenda item is to consider whether or not to take item 6, which is guidance on legislative consent in private. Are the members content to take that in private? I'm grateful. Our second item is to take evidence on 3 SSIs relating to the issue of dual mandates. The SSIs are the Scottish Parliament Disqualification of Councillors Regulations 2025 draft, Scottish Parliament Disqualification of Members of the House of Commons Regulations 2025, and Scottish Parliament Disqualification of Members of the House of Lords Regulations 2025. Members will recall that the committee has, earlier in this session, considered a petition relating to the question of dual mandates. This was an issue that we asked about in our Stage 1 scrutiny of the Scottish Elections Representation and Reform Bill. Amendments to that bill at later stages are what have led to the SSIs before us this morning. And we are also joined for our consideration of these SSIs by Graham Simpson, MSP, who was indeed the member who lodged the amendments in relation to it. Today, we'll have the opportunity to take evidence from the Minister of Parliamentary Business and Veterans before we go on to consider whether to recommend to the Parliament that the regulations be approved. So, can I welcome to this meeting Graham Day, Minister for Parliamentary Business and Veterans, and also welcome him to his new position. Ailsa McKeever, Parliament Legislative Unit, Scottish Government, Ian Hockenhall, Head of the Elections Team, Scottish Government, and Jordan McGorry, Scottish Government Legal Directorate. Before we turn to questions from members, Minister, do you want to make an opening statement?
Thank you, Kevina. I would, if that's okay. And thank you for inviting me to give evidence on these 3 sets of regulations this morning. The regulations being scrutinised today are the culmination of an intense period of consultation and policy development since the passage of the Scottish Elections Representation and Reform Act 2025. Part 2 of that Act, which was passed unanimously by the Scottish Parliament in December of 2024, requires that the Scottish Ministers lay draft regulations before the Parliament prohibiting MSPs from holding dual mandates as MSPs and peers. It includes a discretionary power in relation to MSPs who are also councillors. A public consultation exercise ran in early 2025 to ensure members of the public, interested stakeholders and political parties had an opportunity to share their views on the issue of dual mandates in the Scottish Parliament. The consultation sought views on the practical steps to create a workable policy for the institution. There are 3 sets of regulations before us today, one for each category of dual mandate. The first set of regulations will disqualify MSPs who also hold an MP role if they do not resolve their dual mandate within 49 days of being returned as an MSP or an MP, whichever comes second. This period is intended to limit vacancies which arise before the end of June, thereby ensuring or seeking to ensure by-elections do not fall over the typical Scottish school summer holiday period in July and August. The second set of regulations will disqualify MSPs who also hold a role as a member of the House of Lords if they do not resolve their dual mandate within 14 days of being returned as an MSP or within 14 days of taking the oath as a member of the House of Lords, whichever comes second. This period is shorter than the other periods proposed to reflect the unelected nature of the Lords and therefore the lack of constituents or by-elections that would be expected in comparison with the alternative categories. The final set of regulations will disqualify MSPs who also hold a role as a councillor in a Scottish local authority if they do not resolve their dual mandate before the end of one of the periods of exception. The first exception applies if there are less than 372 days between the day the person is returned as an MSP and the day the next ordinary election of councillors is due to be held. The exception allows councillors who become MSPs at an election which fall in the year before the local elections to complete their term as councillors. This is intended to prevent a large number of vacancies and by-elections within a year of a local government election. The second exemption applies where there are more than 372 days between when a councillor is returned as an MSP and the day of the next ordinary election of councillors. In these circumstances, they must resolve their dual mandate within 49 days of being elected to their second role. As is the case with the first set of regulations, this 7-week period is intended to limit by-elections over the summer period. While all the regulations will come into force on the day after they are signed, they do not disqualify any MSP until the day of the poll at the next Scottish Parliament election, and this ensures that no current MSPs face disqualification, providing around 6 months' notice of the change in position and to prevent any disruption to the last year of the current Parliament.
Thank you. Just before we come to questions from the committee, I know that there are a number of declarations of interest that would be appropriate to make. So, Emma, could I come to you first?
Thank you, Convener. I'd like to declare that until May 2022, I held a role as a Highland councillor and received a salary for this, which I donated to local charities in the Highlands.
That's right. Thank you, Emma. Sue, could I come to you?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I was in a similar position in that until May 2022, I was a local councillor in the City of Edinburgh for Pentland Hills Ward. I was, I suppose, fortunate enough that Council had a mechanism to allow my salary to go direct to local charities and such that it never came to my bank account. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Ruth, can I come to you?
Thank you, Convener. Until the 19th of May 2016, I was a North Ayrshire councillor.
Excellent, thank you. I'm now open to the committee for questions. Sue, would you like to start off?
Yes, thank you. Minister, you heard there in the declarations of interest that there's a number of issues regarding that period of time when you're allowing to sit as a councillor and as an MSP. And there's also, obviously, this is recommending the salaries would be given up, I suspect, is probably a better way. And there's different mechanisms of doing that in terms of that transparency. Mine was, as I said, taken. At source, Ms Roddick's, it was her decision to transfer. But how would you manage that? Because I'm also aware that there were councillors that indeed took their salary as well as their MSP salary while they were holding the dual mandates. And I was wondering if you might want to comment on that.
Well, I can take you through what we're doing in the regulations, but I'll bring Ailsa in to explain the rationale for what we're doing, if that's helpful.
Yes, so as you'll see from the regulations, when we look at the MSP councillor scenario, what we have proposed is that your MSP salary is reduced by whatever the base councillor salary is at the time, and that ensures that people in that situation are only receiving the equivalent of one salary, and that is the higher of the two salaries. So that creates consistency across the board. It makes sure that everyone in that scenario has the same salary limitations put in place, and the rationale for that was that there was quite strong views coming through our public consultation about how members of the public thought that salary limitations should be applied. So that was how we ended up taking that decision there.
Okay.
Essentially, what we're trying to do is to protect colleagues in that situation as well, because there's often a great deal of media interest in what's happening there, and people may be acting with the best of intent. I think this is a clearer way to do it, a more transparent way to do it, and hopefully provides a degree of protection for MSPs who find themselves in that situation.
Yes, no, that's agreeable, because I mean, I was fortunate, as I said, Edinburgh had a mechanism for me to nominate two charities for the money to be separately sent, so that was quite... but in terms of, this is maybe not one for this committee, so it might be something else, but in terms of your salaries coming down, pensions are different, there's that element as well. How does all of that square off in terms of those concerns?
So we've spoken to parliamentary officials while we've been drafting these regulations. They've had notice about the provisions we were putting in place, so that would be for them to take forward and ensure that the salary reductions that they are required to put in place was then reflected across other aspects like tax and pensions.
One more, and it is very much, I'm thinking at the other end of things, HMRC, when we've got our self-assessment tax returns that we have to that are complicated, and so I'm just assuming that we'll figure a way to make it very clear and easy for this all to be reflected when we have to declare our various
Might I suggest, convener, there's perhaps a role for the committee in that, in writing to the Parliament to seek that assurance. I think it's a very valid point that you make, because colleagues will have very complicated tax affairs as they transition from perhaps being a councillor to an MSP, and there is that transition period on salaries, and you would not want colleagues to find themselves finding difficulties further down the line. So I think I'm certainly happy for our part to have a conversation with the Parliament about the practicalities of that. Perhaps the committee may feel that it wants to reinforce that.
Okay, thanks. That's me okay.
Thank you. So just for clarification, Minister, I mean, the proposals are set before us in these 3 SSIs, where 2 of them have a remuneration deduction which will relate to the MSP salary. You can confirm that discussions have taken place with effectively corporate body here about the consequences. I think, Ailsa, you've suggested this, but I would just like it on the record, because if we have an area that you have an unresolved problem in, that you're seeking others to facilitate, that may raise a concern about the SSIs that are being presented to us as the formula for arriving at what was carried through unanimously in the legislation. So it is the case that discussions have been had with corporate body, and that the practical provisions on the reflection of how any deductions take place would fall within them. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, I'm happy to confirm that official level discussions have taken place, and we've had confirmation that officials within the Parliament are comfortable that they can administer what we have put forward. The former Minister had also written to SPCB, I think at the end of June, to confirm plans as well.
I was just suggesting, convener, that if you felt the need to reinforce that or to seek further assurance from the parliamentary authorities, that option was open.
It's the phrase further and reassurance that worries me about an SSI that's being presented, or 3 SSIs which are being presented today. Thank you. Emma, would you like to come in? Because I know that you're online.
My questions have been answered here, convener.
That's fine. No, that's fine. Edward, do you have any questions?
Thank you, convener. And can I just say at the outset, I'm delighted that this is being brought forward to the Parliament. I remember when I was a member of this committee, it was an issue that we wrestled with many years ago, and I think it's the right move to make. Just a question is, why did you decide, in the way that you sorted out the finance, that the split would be that the council salaries would still be paid by presumably the council, and the MSP salary would be paid by the Parliament? Surely the councils are the ones that are short of money, and anyone who could bear it would be the Scottish Parliament, Minister. I'd just like to understand why you were...
Again, I wasn't here when this was initially progressed. Ailsa can perhaps explain the rationale.
Yeah, I would say that when we decided how to apply the salary limitations, it was done with consistency in mind. So what we have presented is that it is always the MSP salary that is adjusted. We don't have the powers to adjust an MP salary, so taking the responsibility and keeping it in one place, so the MP salary, the council salary, are all taken forward within this institution, felt like the simplest and most consistent way to ensure that that is done correctly across the board.
So, I'm sorry, the one thing I'd also say just on that is that, could you also explain to me, I believe in some councils that people in senior admin and responsibility roles get allowances on top of their council salary. So could you explain to me why you've deducted only the basic rate? Because they could be getting the basic rate plus.
That was covered in, that was part of our thinking.
Yes, so again, that was to create consistency, so we've not sought to address presiding officer salary, ministerial salaries, senior council salaries, leader salaries in councils as well, particularly with the senior councillor salary. That is not a sort of national level that's been set, so we understood again from parliamentary officials that administering that would also create an additional burden for them, as well as it being sort of inconsistent with how we are treating other roles that have additional responsibility and additional remuneration for them.
Okay, so just from that point of view, it's the easier route, which I can understand because it's easy to administer. But is it possible to get on the record, Minister, that if somebody was getting additional pay on top of councillors' pay, you wouldn't expect them to draw it because it would make them better off than an MSP or just a normal councillor who'd come across?
But we would be dealing with a very limited period. So I think to Ailsa's point, this is about consistency, and that's why it's focused in on the base salary. And the further complication that arises here in the context of additional remuneration, SRAs, they can be variable. So in a practical sense, it would have been quite difficult to manage that. I think what we've come up with is a pragmatic set of proposals that are, I think, easily understood and implementable. To your point about expectation, I mean, that's a matter for the individual to decide what they're going to do.
Okay, I think I've probably explored that as far as I can, Convener. But one further thing, just a comment if I can make, Convener, is I think that the way the salaries have been dealt with, i.e. it's deducted at source, is a much more comfortable position to be in rather than allowing people to choose charities and it being difficult sometimes to administer. And maybe they have links with those charities which may have problems. But I think it's the right way. And on that basis, I think this is a huge step in the right direction. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Edward. So, again, really for the purpose of clarification, because in relation to members of Parliament, rightly and understandably, there is no control that this place has over those salaries. It was decided to take the same approach on the two elected and the unelected statutory instrument that we have before us, that it was easier and more pragmatic to look at the MSP salary to make the deductions for which control can be given, and then actually the practicalities of implementing it can be made. Is that right? Yeah. Can I ask then, sorry, before I come to Ruth, I was just got a point on this. There is no deduction in relation to members of the House of Lords, because in the policy document you say that they don't receive a salary, they receive an attendance allowance. What discussion, what consideration was had, and perhaps drawing on the consultation that you did, why it wasn't considered that it would be appropriate to look at that attendance allowance in the same way that you've looked at the salaries for councillors and MPs?
Okay.
Yeah. So essentially the variation across members of the House of Lords and what they may be claiming could be very wide. There's not really much information available to allow us to take a view on how varied that would be and how many people would be captured by that. So it fell into a space where it felt like the numbers involved for a period that is only 14 days rather than 49, the administrative burden there could make it quite complicated to actually implement in practice and make deductions that were in line with very varied daily allowances that have been claimed for a very short period, potentially nothing at all as well.
I think it would also have required a self-declaration from the member as to how much they had earned in that period.
Yes. So that if we go back to the fundamental reasons for why we are seeking to end dual mandates, that is because it is rightly considered that roles like councillor, MP, roles like MSP are a full-time job that we're required, or we expect the individuals who fulfil those to give their full-time commitment to it. So that the discussions that we've had over the financial side of it are in relation to the practical implementation of one of the consequences where individuals, I'm going to use the phrase benefit, but I doubt any of them feel it as a benefit in the sense of receiving effectively two salaries for a period of time. That's the policy decision about what we're trying to achieve today, isn't it?
It is, but it's also what the public would expect, Convener. Yeah, the public's expectation that people are focused in on the job to which they have been elected. And again, it goes back to something I said earlier. It also helps protect colleagues in some instances as well from criticism.
Yeah. So my question in relation to that is, I mean, the one sort of outstanding period of time is in relation to councillors, which falls because of an understandable concern of multiple by-elections occurring following a Holyrood election. But the period of 372 days is a considerable period of time for the overlap to occur. And did that form any part in the consideration about whether or not the salary should be paid for a period, there should be a dual salary for a period of time? Because there are effectively, therefore, if not quite two full-time jobs, certainly one plus an almost full-time job would take account. So what was the considerations, really, I'm saying, for someone who is effectively being required potentially to hold down two jobs, but to see a penalisation in the salary? Was that any part of the consideration in either coming up with the 372 days or alternatively just saying, actually, the burden of multiple by-elections outweighs looking at anything less than that?
Again, if it was Governor Ailson, because she went through this whole process.
Yeah, I would say that 372-day period has very much been, has come about through that desire to avoid significant numbers of by-elections. At the same time, that would only see councillors then in that role for a short period before they are then facing another election. With regards to the salary aspect, there a combination of the consultation responses that showed really strong support for stronger salary limitations being in place, but also that recognition that the standard practice at the moment for most is that they are not taking that salary anyway, so it wouldn't be a significant jump from what is happening informally at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I suppose my other question is, what mechanisms are going to exist to monitor this? Because if we look at councillors, they could potentially resign their councillorship much earlier than that, and so this is a sort of long stop. What is going to prevent multiple by-elections occurring in around about September, the year of a Holyrood election?
I guess ultimately there's always going to be an element of it being up to the individual. There's only so much we can control. I mean, it is possible that you could have a resignation in the MP-MSP space despite our best efforts in that summer period. But again, in that instance, you would, if people will want to sort their lives out, they will want to get organised. So and I think most people are cognisant of the reason for the 49 days, and therefore we would expect common sense to prevail. I recognise the risk that you allude to, Convener, but I guess my perspective is a limit to which we can manage this, but I would expect it to be monitored going forward to see if there is the issue that you allude to, that we still have a plethora of by-elections.
So who will take responsibility for the monitoring?
We'll undertake the responsibility.
The Scottish Government will monitor it.
Us to do that,
because what concerns me is that, and I think when we look at the public responses to the consultation, there is a very, very strong view that you shouldn't hold two positions. There will be enormous pressure on new MSPs to immediately resign their council seats because they want to give a full-time commitment to this job. It is probably things that may be extracted from them during the election period as undertakings to do. And the only concern that I have is that, and I understand why, the SSIs have been articulated as an environment in which this can happen, but has perhaps ignored a reality that we could face, and I think more at councillors, I must say, than with Westminster, because I think that would be resolved and understood before the election, but about multiple council by-elections, which could potentially happen only months before the start of the campaign for the new council elections in 27.
I recognise that risk, Convener, but in taking forward the regs, we had to strike a balance, and we had to take account of the, as was alluded to earlier, the risks around having by-elections arising in large scale to elect people for maybe 6 months or 9 months with all the cost that comes with that. Nothing's perfect, but I think this is the most pragmatic way to proceed. And of course, we'll monitor that. And if the concerns that you're expressing arise, it will be open to Parliament to return to that if that's deemed necessary.
Absolutely. Emma, I think you would like to come in.
Yes, thanks, convener. For my part, as a councillor and MSP at the same time, it wasn't easy to hold both roles, though I would actually compare it to being a minister at the same time as an MSP. But a driver for me was not wanting to leave a vacancy on the local planning committee. I am curious, though, Minister, you say that the by-election concern is the main driver for the 372 days, but if a councillor were to step down within 6 months of the full election, then there wouldn't have to be a by-election either. So why is it 372 instead of 186?
So we'll go back to
Ailsa, I think they want to
on the rationale for the 372 days.
So the 372 days is crafted there to ensure that from the point of a Scottish Parliament election, if the local government election is scheduled within that time period, that person can retain their role until the term ends. So that is the rationale for that time period there, to ensure it captures the date of the scheduled election rather than any other point in time. So it's pinned around the election date rather than any other point, if that makes sense.
So would it be correct to say that if we look at the events that are going to happen next year and the year after, 372 days will take you just beyond the scheduled council elections, but is more than the 6 months which would occasion or would mean there was no need for a by-election if the resignation was in that period?
Yes.
It captures the 6 months plus to the election of Holyrood.
Yeah, and it might be useful for colleagues to understand why it's 372 days, 72 days and not 365 days. That's because the first Thursdays in May can fall up to 6 extra days apart. So Thursday the 1st of May 2036 and Thursday the 7th of May 2037 are 371 days apart. So that's why that number was, in case anyone was wondering.
Emma, would you like to come back?
Yeah, I still just wonder, given there's the 49 days for MPs to resolve their conflict, why there's not similar in for councillors. If we believe that holding two roles is not the best situation and that by-elections are what we want to avoid, why not require that a councillor give up their role after or within 186 days?
Minister?
Yeah.
I think what we're seeking to ensure colleagues have the ability to do is see out that full term and not create that vacancy where I think if people are required to resign at that slightly earlier point, there is still the potential for a gap where members of the public don't have that representation. So this allows them to see that out right to the very end of their term rather than concluding slightly earlier.
Emma, do you want to come back? I'm not sure that actually responds to your question.
It does in a sense, because, you know, that's a kind of vacancy that I didn't want to put my ward in the position of having, but it does feel inconsistent, is all I would say.
Edward, I think you wanted to come in. I don't know if your question's been answered.
No, it's more on the mechanics of it, if I may, convener. And I don't know the answer to this, but if you're an MP and then get elected to be an MSP, presumably you'll then go straight on to being able to employ staff as an MSP, which may also then be the staff that you're employing as an MP. And my question is, have you considered that? And is that guidance going to be issued between the two parliaments? Because I think there could be a period where the MSP and MP might be, well, you're solving one, but I'm wondering if you thought about solving the other, or does it not happen? I just don't know, Minister, but you will have looked at this, I'm sure.
I'm happy to come in on that. We actually had a roundtable discussion with IPSA where they spoke to us in a bit of detail about how they would operate that. They're very confident that in that scenario they have very good relationships with colleagues within the Scottish Parliament and that they work through those instances in quite a collegiate way already, and there was no concern that there would be scope for anyone to be claiming twice for staff salaries or anything like that, and they would be able to work that between them to ensure that there was a smooth transition for those that were supporting someone from an MP to an MSP or vice versa, and there wouldn't be any difficulties with managing that. But they were very confident that the process they've already got in place and the guidance that they would need to put in place could be done and make sure that was clear to colleagues.
So they're confident, you're confident?
they're confident that they can manage the process of what we've put in place here. So yes.
Okay, thank you very much, Convener. I think.
So, yeah, thank you, Edward. Expenses were excluded from all of this because we've discussed that with regard to the House of Lords. So we're looking specifically at salary. So actually the question about the implementation of expenses falls to be organised between IPSA and the corporate body here. But again, the question of expenses rests outside the purview of this Parliament anyway in relation to Westminster. It could only be in relation to expenses at corporate body. And am I right to go back to the confirmation that you gave last time from that corporate body are able to deal with this through our expense system rather than try and pursue someone that's out with our remit? Is that fair?
Yeah, officials are happy that they've got the ability to take that forward.
Excellent, excellent. Ruth, is there anything that you want to?
No, I think it's all very welcome, and I think the questions that I have been covered. I think it's good to provide clarity, and I think that recognition that there is pressures on individuals when they have the dual mandate. So it's good to see it all cleared up.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions that relate to our fellow committee, the DPLR, and their responses to it, and indeed the committee notice that was gave in the chamber about on a higher level, the generic quality of some of the drafting that is coming out of the Scottish Government at the moment. In particular, when we look at the questions that sit before us today, it again, ironically, goes back to pay. It's funny how money is so important. And the tension that exists between the Scotland Act and the wording that's been chosen within these SSIs. Minister, would you like to explain, before I delve into the level of confidence that you have that it complies with legislation, why we ended up in a position where a different terminology was used, which certainly caused tension for the other committee?
So it caused tension, but the DPR committee recognised it did what it said. So there wasn't an issue about, I think the only issue they raised was the discrepancy in the use of language. So they were content it would achieve the purpose. Oddly enough, that's a question I asked as soon as I looked at this, convener, because I recognised the commentary from the DPR committee. Effectively, and I'll bring Jordan in a minute, effectively we believe that the language that's being used provides the maximum clarity on what is being set out to be achieved. And I'll bring Jordan to talk you through that if that's useful.
Thank you. So the reason it's slightly different from what is in the Scotland Act at the moment is because it does something slightly different. The existing reductions in salary in the Scotland Act are reductions in salary. They take a proportion of the pay. There is still an amount of pay which is paid to the member even while they hold a dual mandate. What the House of Commons regulations do in this case is stop the MSP salary entirely for the dual mandate period, so it was felt it ought to be worded differently because it does something different, and we ought to be very direct about the fact that it does something different, so that there was no ambiguity that the salary just is not paid.
So the statement that exists in the Scotland Act at the moment, that there needs to be provision for the payment, you are altering to say you're seeking the authority through this SSI to amend, to redefine it.
No, it will not change the mechanism by which pay is arrived at. Pay will continue to be...
Sorry, I realise it won't change the mechanism. What I'm concerned about is the ambiguity in wording between one which places a duty to pay and another which is placing a duty effectively not to pay by deduction.
Yes, we're confident that the reference in the current drafting in the SSI to Section 81 makes it clear that what we are referring to in the new drafting is how Parliament is to use its authority to make arrangements. We've not framed it in quite the same way because, as I say, we wanted to be as direct as possible about what is a total removal. But we are confident that it does still link up with the existing system correctly.
So you are confident, the Scottish Government is confident that the authority to make provision for payments will prevent an accusation against the corporate body that they are failing the Scotland Act because they're not making a provision for the payment?
Yes, we're confident.
Do you have a precedent for that?
We are in unprecedented times, I suppose, because we have not yet, in the 25 years since, amended this part to make it do anything different. So we are in new territory, but we are confident it will work regardless.
And I am not asking, as politicians seem to ask at the drop of the hat, for publication of legal evidence, but your position is supported by legal advice?
Yes.
Okay, I'm grateful for that. And are you content with those answers, Minister,
I am
speaking on behalf of the Scottish Government?
I am indeed. I was just smiling because I was thinking about the number of times that government is criticised for being insufficiently clear. In this instance, we've sought to provide the maximum clarity, recognising that as we're in unprecedented territory, people would like that.
I think, tongue-in-cheek, it's because it's lacking clarification that this question arose in the first place. But I think you have set on record that the government is confident that it will stand the test, perhaps even a judicial test, and that you have advice that supports that. Does any other committee member have any other questions before I turn to a colleague who's joining us today? No? No, that's fine. Actually, just for record, the 14 days in respect of the House of Lords is in essence a period of time that's been chosen so that someone in that position can resign. Are the Scottish Government confident that there are no circumstances that may exist where it would be impossible for an individual to resign within 14 days? For example, if the House of Lords is not sitting between a general election and the King's Speech?
I'll bring Elsa in the detail of that. But to answer your question, Convener, the Welsh system is for 8 days. And it, I think, was deemed, as we looked at it, to be working quite well, effectively. But we took the view that it was probably a little bit sharp and that we extended it to 14 days because we thought that was a sensible compromise, if you want to look at it that way. But Ailsa can come in the detail.
Yeah, so I think 14 days is flexible enough. The 14 days doesn't start until the new member of the House of Lords takes the oath. So there is a sort of built-in flexibility there by the fact that they are not officially a member until that point. So I think we're content that there is not going to be scenarios where someone is caught short of that. But I would maybe just flag that the existing provisions within the Scotland Act does have a mechanism in which Parliament can effectively overwrite the disqualification if something has gone wrong, and that already exists. So in the bizarre scenario that we can't imagine at the moment, if it did occur, there would be a mechanism there for Parliament to recognise that something had gone wrong with the system rather than with the individual's attempts to resign, and could give them a little bit of leeway if needed to, but we can't imagine that that would be required. Did
you consider the challenge that obviously ennoblement occurs when it occurs in the House of Lords, but an individual will be aware that ennoblement is coming and actually has a huge amount of control, funnily enough, about when that actually happens? Was that any part of your concerns, or are you satisfied, going back to the policy behind this, that it is actually those that are Lords in the House of Lords that you're talking about with regard to dual mandate, rather than someone anticipating that?
Yeah, we did discuss that and consider that, and we were very clear that they are not actually fulfilling that role until the point that they are the member and they've taken the oath. So while they may have prior notice that that is occurring in the future, it's potentially not unhelpful if they want to extend that period to see out their term if there's an election coming up or something like that. So we were happy with that situation.
And my final question, sorry, Graham, before I come to you, in relation to that, the present situation is that, as my understanding is, that Lords in essence suspend their membership of the House of Lords for the period of time, and that can't be reinstated without effectively it being public notice. What was the policy reason for not being satisfied with that, but requiring entire termination from the House of Lords?
So our consultation responses showed quite a strong view on this. I think around 2/3 were in favour of a leave of absence not being permitted, and that was largely around wanting to see commitment from their elected representatives that they were fully focused on this role. They weren't, I think some people refer to sort of having a backup option available and things like that in their responses. In addition, there was some discussion during our roundtables with stakeholders about the ability to exert sort of soft influence through attending the House of Lords, but not necessarily taking part. So you still have access to other members there and could use your influence in that way without actually taking part in proceedings and voting. So the leave of absence would still allow for that, which is why we landed where we did.
That's very, very helpful, Ailsa. So it goes back to that policy decision that being an MSP is a full-time job. The public expectation is that you have a full-time commitment to it, nothing else to detract from it. And that has underlined what has resulted in practical decisions having to be taken over these SSIs. Thank you. Thank you for your patience, Graham. Can I come to you?
Yes, thank you very much. Obviously, I'm delighted that we've arrived at this point and that we've got these regulations in front of the committee. I think dealing with this is long overdue, and as has been said already, the public do not expect people to hold dual mandates, so to be dealing with it is a good thing. I've got a couple of questions, actually to follow on from what you were asking, Convener. I just want to be clear on, in relation to the House of Lords, that the position where somebody takes a leave of absence, and we've got one member of this Parliament who has done that, will no longer be possible. Is that correct? Yes. That is correct.
Yes.
Yeah, that's correct. But not until the start of the next parliamentary session.
The next parliamentary
session.
So
it will not impact anyone currently.
Yeah.
Yes. So I don't know if that, I'm not going to name the member, we know who it is, but if that member was to stand next year and be returned to this Parliament, they would not be able to continue in the House of Lords. Is that correct? Is that, or they have a choice to make?
Yes, correct.
That's correct. Okay. And just in relation to councillors, you've set out very clearly that we come to the Scottish Parliament election next year. I would expect that a number of people returned to the Parliament will be councillors. That's always the case. They would not have to stand down as councillors for a year, let's say, until the next council elections. But we've also got the position where you could be a councillor and become an MSP sort of mid-term. And that's happened before. I mean, we had an example. An example last session was Tom Mason, who came in. You've chosen a period there where somebody like Tom Mason would have to stand down as a councillor within 49 days. Why did you arrive at that?
Essentially, we're trying to make sure that the rules are as simple and easily understood as possible. So having 49 days applied in scenarios which are not when that local election is in that one-year cycle, or House of Lords, to keep it consistent across the board, the MP and the councillor grace period is both 49 days to ensure that members understand what is expected of them and there's clarity for them as to what they have to do by which point.
But I understand the 49-day figure for MPs, MSPs. You're trying to avoid the summer period. But if you were a councillor and you returned and you become an MSP, that could happen at any time of the year. So the 49 days is a bit illogical.
It could occur at any point in the year, but we've also thought about it in the reverse, in which a current MSP seeks to become a councillor, which is rare but not impossible. So to ensure there's consistency and that the summer by-election issues were still accounted for, that 49-day period would also ensure that that issue was avoided over summer, in the reverse scenario where a current MSP then seeks to become a councillor at that point in May where the usual election would occur.
Okay.
Just before you progress, I think Ruth has a supplemental question just on this point.
Yeah.
Thank you, Convener. But would it not be the case in that scenario that it's likely to be one individual? Because I would imagine that sort of mid-term scenario is about, if it's not a by-election, it's going to be someone standing down for the list. So it takes away that administrative burden of lots of by-elections after an election. Is that perhaps
Yes,
what that
that's
points
correct
to?
as well, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Greg?
That's entirely correct. I have no further questions, but I welcome the regulation.
And I suppose just before I, just again, by way of clarification, the purposes of the statutory instruments is not to remove someone from being a councillor, it's not to remove someone from being an MP or to remove someone from the House of Lords. It would prevent an individual sitting as an MSP if those other consequences existed outside of those periods. So actually it's not about this place ordering someone to step down as a councillor. It's saying, should you choose not to, the consequence will be that you cannot be an MSP. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's all focused on giving someone the time and space to make a decision and remove themselves from one of their roles before disqualification as an MSP would occur automatically.
Excellent. Thank you. So the next item on our agenda is a commencement of debate, and we are in essence going to have 3 debates, one on each of the subordinate legislation that's put before us. So the first is on motion S6M 18743, which is seeking the committee's agreement to recommend to the Parliament that the Scottish Parliament disqualification of members of the House of Commons Regulations 2025 be approved. As members will be aware, only the Minister and members can speak during any debate on the motion. So may I invite the Minister to move the motion?
Moved, Convener.
Does any member wish to contribute to the debate? If no member, so we can move to the next. So the question is that motion S6M 18743 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Grateful. Agenda item 4 is now to discuss S6M 18744, which is seeking the committee's agreement to recommend to the Parliament that the Scottish Parliament disqualification of members of the House of Lords Regulations 2025 be approved. Minister, would you like to move the motion?
Moved, Convener.
Excellent. Would any member like to speak to the motion? No. So the question is that motion S6M 18744 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Yep. Grateful. The next item is to debate motion S6M 18745, which seeks the committee's agreement to recommend to the Parliament that the Scottish Parliament disqualification of councillors regulations 2025 be approved. Again, only members, the Minister, can speak to this. Minister, would you like to move the motion?
Moved, Convener.
Would any member like to contribute? Can I come to Sue Webber?
Thanks. It's just briefly on the back of some of the questions that Mr Mountain was asking around when those councillors do have those additional responsibilities. I think we should be mindful of that, because a leader's allowance on top of a councillor's allowance, certainly in the City of Edinburgh, can be a substantial remuneration. So I think it should certainly be on our radar about how we manage that going forward.
Minister, would you like to respond?
I think there's an opportunity, I think that's a welcome point that you make, an opportunity for the Standards Committee or its next iteration of the Parliament to continue to monitor the effectiveness of these regulations. These may be a starting point that develop as the Parliament goes forward.
Thank you.
Excellent. Would any other member like to contribute?
Sorry.
Edward Mountain.
Having raised that, I think that's important, and a bit of research that I've done suggests that, you know, there could be sums up to including £20,000 in relation to some of the admin appointments that could be paid on top of a councillor's salary. It is difficult, and I know the Minister has alluded to this, because there are exceptions. I think additional pay and grading might be disallowed in some council areas but encouraged in other areas. So I would encourage monitoring of this to make sure, and the clear comment that it would not be expected that that people who are getting that additional money would be taking it on top of their salary. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could just say that would be his understanding, or maybe not.
Minister.
Simply acknowledge the point you've made, Mr Mountain. As I said a moment ago, if the committee sees fit and then Parliament sees fit to pass these regulations, clearly it will fall to the next Parliament to monitor their effectiveness.
Thank you, Convener.
I'm grateful. The question is then that motion S6M 18745 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Excellent. The committee will report on the outcome of the decisions on the SSIs in due course. Are members content to delegate the authority to approve the draft report to the convener? Content. The deadline for reporting is the 27th of October. And with nothing further to do in public, I will bring the public part of this meeting to an end. Thank you.